Biker got a call from the hospital. Little girl is fighting for her life and keeps saying your name. The neon beer signs cast a hazy glow across the worn wooden bar. Ridgewalker sat alone at the corner, nursing the same whiskey he'd ordered an hour ago. The place wasn't much, just a roadside stop called the Crossroads, where bikers and truckers could find a moment's peace. Ridge liked it that way. No questions, no small talk, just the quiet hum of classic rock from the jukebox and the occasional clink of glasses. At 45, Ridge had grown comfortable with solitude. His weathered leather vest bore the patches of the Hells Angels, earned through years of loyalty and respect. The road had been his only constant companion, and that suited him fine. No attachments meant no one to disappoint, no one to lose. Another? The bartender nodded toward Ridge's nearly empty glass. Ridge shook his head. Got a ride tonight? The bartender moved away without another word. That's what Ridge appreciated about places like this. People minded their own business. His calloused fingers traced the rim of his glass as he stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Lines had deepened around his eyes, and strands of gray now threaded through his dark hair. The face looking back at him held stories he rarely shared. The vibration of his phone broke his thoughts. Ridge frowned, pulling it from his pocket. The screen showed an unknown number with the local area code. He almost declined it. Telemarketers had gotten bold these days, but something made him swipe to answer. Yeah? His voice was gruff from lack of use. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, professional but with an unmistakable tremor. Is this Ridgewalker? His body tensed. Few people connected his road name to his actual identity. Who's asking? My name is Sarah Reeves. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. She took a shaky breath that Ridge could hear clearly, even over the bar's background noise. I'm sorry to call so late, but this is urgent. Ridge straightened on his bar stool. I'm not hurt, and I don't know anyone who is, he said flatly, ready to end the call. Please, just listen, the nurse continued, her voice dropping lower. There's a little girl here. She's been admitted with a severe condition. She's fighting for her life, and... The woman paused. And what? Ridge asked, impatience edging his tone. She keeps saying your name, just Ridge, over and over. We couldn't figure out who she was asking for until another nurse recognized it might be, well, someone from your organization. Ridge's knuckles whitened around the phone. This some kind of joke? His voice was dangerously quiet now. I swear to you, it's not. The tremor in her voice deepened. She can't be more than 8 years old. Dark hair, blue eyes. She's very weak, but whenever she's conscious, she asks for you. The bar seemed to fade around him as Ridge processed her words. No kid should know his name. He kept his life compartmentalized. The club, the road, the occasional companion. No children. No family. I don't know any kids, he said firmly. You've got the wrong guy. Please, the nurse begged. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't important. Her mother is here too, but she's not holding up well. The little girl, Maddie, she keeps whispering your name like you're someone who can help her. Ridge felt a chill run down his spine at the mention of the name. Maddie. It didn't ring any bells, but something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. What's the mother's name? He asked, his voice barely audible. A pause. Lena. Lena Collins. The name hit Ridge like a physical blow. Lena. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in nearly a decade. Memories crashed through the carefully constructed walls in his mind. A woman with golden brown hair and a smile that had once made him believe in possibilities beyond the road. Ridge stood abruptly, tossing bills on the bar. I'll be there in 20. He ended the call, shoved the phone into his pocket, and strode toward the door, ignoring the curious glances from the few other patrons. Outside, the night air was cool against his face as he zipped up his leather jacket and swung his leg over his Harley. The engine roared to life, echoing in the empty parking lot. Ridge pulled onto the highway, leaning into the curve of the road as he accelerated. The wind whipped past him, carrying away the questions that threatened to overwhelm his thoughts. As the miles disappeared beneath his wheels, one thing became clear. Whatever waited for him at that hospital would change everything. The city lights blurred as Ridge pushed his motorcycle through the quiet streets. This late at night, traffic had thinned to almost nothing, leaving him alone with the steady rumble of his Harley and the chaos of his thoughts. Street lamps cast pools of yellow light on the pavement, illuminating his path toward St. Mary's Hospital. "This has got to be some kind of mistake," he muttered to himself, the words lost in the rush of wind. Or worse, a trap. In his years with the club, he'd made enemies, people who might use any leverage to get to him. But a child? Ridge slowed at a red light, his boot touching down on the asphalt to steady the bike. His mind circled back to the nurse's voice, the genuine concern he'd heard. If someone wanted to set him up, they probably wouldn't have sounded so scared. And then there was the name. Lena Collins. His hands tightened around the handlebars as memories flooded back. 8, maybe 9 years ago. The only woman who'd ever made him question his choices. The only one who'd seen past the patches and the leather to something else within him, something he wasn't sure existed anymore. The light turned green. Ridge twisted the throttle, perhaps a little harder than necessary. Their ending hadn't been dramatic. No screaming fights or broken dishes. Just the quiet realization that his life would never fit with hers. She wanted stability, a family. He had the road, the club, the only brotherhood he'd ever known. The day she walked away, he'd convinced himself it was for the best. But a kid? A little girl asking for him by name? Impossible, he told himself as he turned onto Hospital Avenue. The math didn't add up. Or maybe it did, and that's what had his heart hammering against his ribs. Ridge passed through neighborhoods that grew progressively quieter. Homes with darkened windows gave way to medical offices, then to the sprawling complex of St. Mary's. The main building loomed ahead, its windows lit like a lighthouse in the dark. The emergency entrance glowed brightest, a beacon for those in crisis. He circled the parking lot once, scanning for anything suspicious. Unmarked vehicles, people waiting in shadows. An old habit from years of watching his back. Nothing seemed out of place, just the usual scattered cars of night shift workers and visitors with nowhere else to go. Ridge found a spot near the emergency entrance, close enough for a quick exit if needed. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy around him. For a moment, he simply sat there, one foot on the ground, helmet still on. What was he doing here? This wasn't his world. Hospitals meant vulnerability, questions he couldn't answer, people expecting things he couldn't give. The weight of his phone felt heavy in his pocket. He could call the nurse back, tell her there had been a mistake. He could fire up his bike and disappear into the night, back to the simplicity of the open road. But the name Maddie echoed in his mind. A little girl fighting for her life, whispering his name like a prayer. Ridge removed his helmet, hanging it on the handlebar. He ran a hand through his hair, took a deep breath of the cool night air. The hospital entrance stood 50 feet away, doors sliding open occasionally as people came and went. "This is crazy," he muttered, swinging his leg off the bike. Still, his boots carried him forward, one reluctant step after another. The closer he got to those automatic doors, the more his instincts screamed at him to turn around. Nothing good ever came from stepping into unfamiliar territory without backup. That was club rule number 1. Never walk into a situation alone when you don't know what's waiting. But something stronger than caution pulled him forward. Something he hadn't felt in years. Ridge paused at the entrance, watching the doors slide open for a weary-looking doctor hurrying inside. The antiseptic smell of the hospital drifted out, mingling with the night air. One more deep breath. One more chance to turn back. Instead, Ridgewalker squared his shoulders and walked through the doors, stepping into a world where his leather cut and reputation meant nothing, where a little girl he'd never met somehow knew his name. The hospital lobby hit Ridge with a wall of bright fluorescent light that made him squint after the darkness outside. The place smelled of disinfectant and coffee, with undertones of something else. Fear, maybe, or desperation. Neither smell was familiar to him. A few people sat scattered in plastic chairs, some dozing, others staring blankly at muted TVs mounted high on the walls. None of them paid Ridge any attention, despite his leather cut with the Hells Angels patches clearly visible. In here, everyone had bigger worries than a biker in their midst. Ridge approached the front desk, where a tired-looking woman typed at a computer. She glanced up, her eyes widening slightly at his appearance, before her professional mask slipped back into place. "I got a call," Ridge said, his deep voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. "Something about a kid asking for me." Before the receptionist could respond, a woman in blue scrubs hurried from a side hallway, her face lit with recognition. "Mr. Walker?" she asked, approaching quickly. "I'm Nurse Santos. We spoke on the phone." Ridge nodded once, studying her. She was young, maybe 30, with dark circles under her eyes and hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Nothing about her screamed danger or deception. "Look, I think there's been some mistake," he started. "I don't know any." "Please," she interrupted, glancing around nervously. "She's been asking for you all night. The doctors didn't think we should call, but—" Her voice dropped lower. "She got worse after sunset, much worse, and she keeps whispering your name." Ridge felt a knot forming in his stomach. "What's wrong with her?" Nurse Santos hesitated. "I can't discuss details here. Please, just come with me." Something in her eyes, a mix of desperation and hope, made Ridge nod. "Lead the way." She turned quickly, gesturing for him to follow. They passed through a set of double doors, leaving the relative calm of the lobby behind. The hallway beyond bustled with quiet activity, nurses checking charts, orderlies pushing carts, the occasional beep of machinery from rooms they passed. "The girl," Ridge said as they walked. "What's her name?" "Maddie," the nurse replied. "Maddie Collins." The last name hit him like a sucker punch. Collins. Lena's name. Ridge slowed his pace, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "And her mother?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Ms. Collins hasn't left her side in days," Nurse Santos said. "She's exhausted but won't go home. Not with Maddie in this condition." They turned a corner, heading toward a quieter section of the hospital. Pediatrics, Ridge realized, noting the cartoon characters painted on the walls and the small play area they passed. "How old is she?" Ridge's mouth felt dry as he asked. 8. The timing fit. His mind raced, calculating dates and months, remembering his final weeks with Lena before everything fell apart. "And you're sure she asked for me? For Ridge?" The nurse nodded firmly. "Over and over. Just that one word at first. Then last night she said, 'Ridgewalker, clear as day.' That's when we searched her mother's phone contacts and found your number." They approached a nurse's station, where Nurse Santos paused to check a chart. Ridge stood awkwardly beside her, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. A few staff members glanced his way with raised eyebrows. Maddie's room is just down this hall, the nurse said, pointing. Room 212. She hesitated, studying his face. You really don't know her? Ridge shook his head. Never met her. But she knows you, Nurse Santos said quietly. Somehow she knows you. They continued down the hallway, passing rooms with partially closed doors. The sounds of monitoring equipment created a constant background hum, punctuated by occasional voices or movement. Ms. Collins doesn't know we called you, the nurse admitted. The doctors thought it might give her false hope, but I had to try something. Maddie's not responding to treatments the way we'd hoped. Ridge's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure what bothered him more. The thought of seeing Lena again after all these years, or the possibility that the little girl in that room might be his. As they approached room 212, Ridge slowed his steps. Through the partially open door, he could see the dim outline of medical equipment and the foot of a small bed. Then he heard it, so faint he almost missed it. A small, weak voice from inside the room. Ridge. The whisper seemed to hang in the air between them. Nurse Santos turned to him, eyes wide with surprise. She's calling for you, she said. A chill ran down Ridge's spine, raising goosebumps on his arms beneath his leather jacket. That single word, his name, spoken by a child he'd never met, felt more dangerous than any threat he'd faced on the streets. Ridge stood frozen at the doorway. The fluorescent hallway light cut a harsh rectangle across the dim hospital room. Inside, machines hummed and beeped in a steady rhythm. An IV pole stood beside the small bed, plastic tubes snaking down to a tiny arm. And there was Lena. She sat with her back to him, her honey-blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Her hand gently stroked the arm of the child in the bed, a small, pale girl with dark hair spread across the pillow. Ridge's throat tightened. 8 years had passed since he'd seen Lena, but he recognized the curve of her neck, the way she tilted her head slightly as she whispered to the girl. Miss Collins? Nurse Santos spoke softly. Someone's here. Lena turned, her tired eyes widening in shock when they landed on Ridge. The blood drained from her face. Ridge, she whispered, the name catching in her throat. For a moment, nobody moved. Ridge felt like he'd stepped into someone else's life, like he was watching a movie where he didn't belong. What are you doing here? Lena asked, her voice barely audible. She stood up, positioning herself between Ridge and the bed, in a gesture so instinctively protective, it made something twist inside his chest. The nurse called me, Ridge said, his own voice rough. Said the kid was asking for me. Lena shot an accusing glance at Nurse Santos, who lifted her chin. I'm sorry, Miss Collins, but Maddie kept saying his name. I thought you had no right, Lena whispered fiercely. The nurse gave an apologetic nod before backing away. I'll give you some privacy. When the door closed behind her, Ridge and Lena stood facing each other across the small room. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between them. Ridge's eyes moved to the girl in the bed. She looked so small, so fragile against the white sheets. Her skin was almost translucent, dark circles beneath her eyes. A breathing tube rested beneath her nose, and various monitors were attached to her thin arms. Is that... Ridge couldn't finish the question. Maddie, Lena said. My daughter. Ridge took a step closer, studying the girl's face. He saw Lena in the shape of her nose and mouth, but there was something else, something in the stubborn set of her jaw, even in sleep, that sent a jolt of recognition through him. How does she know me? He asked. Lena's hands clenched at her sides. She doesn't. Then why is she saying my name? I don't know, Lena said, her voice cracking. She's been feverish, confused. Ridge moved closer to the bed, stopping when Lena tensed. "What's wrong with her?" Lena's face crumpled, her composure finally breaking. "They don't know exactly. Some kind of infection that's not responding to antibiotics. Her fever spikes at night. She's been getting worse." As if hearing their voices, the little girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway. Unfocused eyes drifted around the room before landing on Ridge. "Ridge," she whispered, the word clear despite her weakness. Lena rushed to her side, stroking her forehead. "Maddie, sweetheart, go back to sleep." But Maddie's eyes stayed on Ridge, a small smile touching her lips before they closed again. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Ridge felt his world tilting sideways, reality shifting beneath his feet. He studied the girl's face, seeing echoes of himself in her features, the set of her eyes, the shape of her forehead. "When were you going to tell me?" he asked quietly. Lena wouldn't look at him. "I wasn't." The simple admission hit harder than any punch Ridge had ever taken. "She's mine, isn't she?" His voice was steady, but inside, everything was chaos. Lena finally raised her eyes to his. They shimmered with unshed tears and old pain. "Yes," she said. "Maddie is your daughter." Ridge stared at the small form in the hospital bed, his daughter, and felt the ground disappear from beneath him. Ridge stood rooted to the floor, his mind racing to catch up with Lena's words. His daughter. The small, fragile girl in the hospital bed was his daughter, a child he never knew existed until this moment. "How?" The question came out rough, barely audible. Lena sank back into the chair beside Maddie's bed. "It was after that night at Tanner's Ridge, before you left for that run to Arizona." She brushed a strand of hair from Maddie's forehead. "I found out 2 weeks later." Ridge remembered that night. Stars scattered across the sky, Lena's laugh echoing in the darkness. It was the last good memory before everything fell apart, before his club had gotten into trouble that sent him underground for months. "Why didn't you tell me?" He tried to keep the anger from his voice, aware of the sleeping child between them. "You were gone, Ridge. Your phone disconnected. The club wouldn't tell me where." Her eyes finally met his, burning with old hurt. "Then I heard about the arrests, the violence. What was I supposed to do, bring a baby into that world?" Ridge had no answer. He knew what his life had been like then. Dangerous, unstable, no place for a child. Maddie stirred in her sleep, her small chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The sound of her breathing filled the silence between them. "Can I?" Ridge gestured towards the bed. Lena hesitated, then nodded, moving her chair slightly to make room. Ridge approached slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Each step toward the bed felt like crossing into unknown territory. He'd never been good with kids, had avoided them most of his life. Now, looking down at Maddie's pale face, he felt completely unprepared. He towered over the hospital bed, his leather jacket creaking as he carefully lowered himself to one knee. From this angle, he could see her better, the dark eyelashes resting against her cheeks, the small nose that reminded him of Lena's, the stubborn set of her jaw that hit him with a jolt of recognition. It was like looking at a ghost of his own childhood. "How old is she?" he whispered, afraid to wake her. 7, Lena said. "Her birthday was last month." 7 years. 7 birthdays he'd missed. 7 Christmases. First steps. First words. First day of school. The knowledge of all he'd missed pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. "Does she—" Ridge struggled to find the right words. "Has she asked about me?" Lena's hands twisted in her lap. She knows her father couldn't be with us. I never told her your name, never showed her pictures." Her voice dropped lower. "That's why I don't understand why she's been calling for you." Ridge studied Maddie's face. Her skin was too pale, almost translucent under the harsh hospital lights. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her breathing seemed too shallow, too quick. "What do the doctors say?" he asked. "They're running tests, some kind of infection that's not responding to treatment." Lena's voice cracked. "Her fever keeps spiking at night. They're worried about—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ridge felt something crack open inside him, a place he'd kept sealed shut for years. Without thinking, he reached toward Maddie's small hand, resting on top of the blanket. Lena tensed but didn't stop him. Just before he touched her, Maddie's eyes fluttered open. Fever-bright and unfocused, they drifted around the room before settling on Ridge's face. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to place him in her fever-clouded mind. "Ridge," she whispered, the word clear despite her weakness. Ridge froze, his hand hovering above hers. "Hey, kid," he managed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. A small smile touched Maddie's lips. Then, to both adults' surprise, she lifted her hand, the one with the IV tube taped to it, and reached toward him. Ridge hesitated, looking at Lena. She seemed as startled as he was, but she gave a slight nod. Gently, with more care than he'd ever shown anything in his life, Ridge took Maddie's small hand in his large, calloused one. Her fingers were so tiny they barely wrapped around his thumb. The moment they touched, something extraordinary happened. Maddie's tense body relaxed. The lines of pain etched on her small face softened. Her breathing, which had been quick and shallow, slowed to a steadier rhythm. The monitor beside the bed showed her heart rate settling into a calmer pattern. Lena leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "Her fever," she whispered. "Feel her forehead." Ridge carefully placed his other hand on Maddie's forehead. The burning heat he'd felt a moment ago had already begun to fade. Maddie's eyes drifted closed again, but her hand held tight to his, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Even as she slipped back into sleep, her grip remained surprisingly strong for someone so small and sick. Ridge knelt there, this child he'd never known holding on to him like he was her lifeline, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Something he thought had died years ago stirred to life in his chest. Ridge reluctantly pulled his hand away from Maddie's and followed Lena into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces. Through the small window in the door, he could still see Maddie sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling in a steadier rhythm than before. "She's never responded to anyone like that," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She crossed her arms tight against her chest, a familiar gesture Ridge remembered from years ago. It was her way of holding herself together when things got tough. Ridge leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Why didn't you try to find me, even after things calmed down?" Lena sighed and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes looked hollow from lack of sleep, but the fierce protectiveness he remembered was still there, burning just below the surface. "I was scared, Ridge." The admission seemed to cost her something. "By the time I knew I was pregnant, your name was in the papers. There was that shooting at the clubhouse. 2 men dead." "I wasn't involved in that," Ridge said, his voice low. "But you were there. You were part of that world." Lena looked away. "I had to think about what was best for the baby. For Maddie." The hallway fell silent, except for the distant beeping of machines and the squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor. Ridge rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard. I wouldn't have hurt her, he said finally. Or you. Maybe not on purpose. Lena's eyes met his. But that life, your brother's, it follows you everywhere. I couldn't risk it. Deep down, Ridge knew she was right. 7 years ago, he'd been reckless, angry, surrounded by men who solved problems with their fists and worse. The club had been everything to him. Family, purpose, identity. I left all that behind, Ridge said, though it wasn't entirely true. He still wore the colors, still answered when called, but he'd pulled back from the worst of it years ago. Lena seemed to read his thoughts. Did you? Really? She glanced at his leather vest with the patches and insignia. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still in deep. Ridge had no good answer. Instead, he changed the subject. Tell me about her. About Maddie. Something in Lena softened. She's smart, too smart sometimes, asks questions that leave me stumbling for answers. A small smile touched her lips. She loves stories about animals, collects rocks and leaves, keeps them in little jars on her windowsill. Ridge tried to picture it. This child with her collections, her questions, her life that had continued completely separate from his own. She's stubborn, Lena continued. Gets that from both of us, I guess. When she sets her mind to something, there's no changing it. Is she usually... Ridge struggled for the right word. Sick like this? Lena shook her head, the worry returning to her face. No, never. She had the usual childhood stuff. Colds, ear infections. But this... Her voice wavered. This came out of nowhere. High fever, fatigue. Then she started calling your name in her sleep. Over and over. But how would she even know my name? Ridge asked. You said you never told her about me. Lena wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I didn't. That's what scares me. She just started saying Ridge 3 days ago. The first time she said it, I nearly dropped a glass of water. A nurse walked by, glancing curiously at them before continuing down the hall. I'm staying, Ridge said suddenly, the decision made before he even realized it. Lena looked surprised. Tonight? Tonight, tomorrow, however long it takes. He straightened from the wall. If my being here helps her, then I'm staying. For a moment, he thought Lena might argue, but instead she just nodded slowly. I'll get you a chair. They returned to the room where Maddie still slept, her face peaceful now. The nurse had brought in a reclining chair that looked far too small for Ridge's large frame, but he sat in it anyway, positioning it beside the bed. Lena took the chair on the opposite side, pulling a thin hospital blanket around her shoulders. I'll be right back, she said, standing suddenly. I need coffee. After she left, Ridge found himself alone with his daughter for the first time. The steady beeping of the machines created a rhythm in the quiet room. He carefully reached out and placed his hand over Maddie's smaller one, marveling at how tiny it was compared to his. Her fingers instinctively curled around his, and something in his chest tightened. He'd never felt needed like this before. Never felt that his mere presence could make such a difference to another person. The machines continued their steady beeping as night settled fully around the hospital. Ridge settled deeper into the uncomfortable chair, his hand still holding Maddie's, knowing with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. Early morning sunlight streamed through the thin hospital curtains, painting golden stripes across the sterile white floor. Ridge blinked awake, his neck stiff from sleeping upright in the too small chair. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then he felt the small hand still nestled in his, and everything rushed back. The hospital room was quiet, except for the gentle beeping of machines and the soft sound of breathing. Across the bed, Lena had fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, dark circles visible beneath her eyes. Ridge carefully stretched his free arm, trying not to disturb Maddie. But as he moved, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing deep brown eyes that looked startlingly like his own. "Ridge," she whispered, her voice small but clearer than it had been the night before. Ridge froze, unsure how to respond. Should he correct her? Tell her to call him something else? The word Dad flashed through his mind, sending a jolt of panic through him. "Hey, kid," he said instead, his voice rough with sleep. "How are you feeling?" Maddie looked at him with curious eyes that seemed too wise for her young face. "You stayed," she said simply. "Yeah." Ridge cleared his throat. "I stayed. I knew you would." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength for someone so small and sick. Ridge glanced at Lena, still asleep across the bed. "Your mom might need a real bed soon," he said quietly. Maddie followed his gaze. "She's been here forever. The nurses tried to make her go home, but she wouldn't." There was something about the way Maddie spoke, direct and unfiltered, that reminded Ridge of himself. No wasted words. "Are you hungry?" Ridge asked, suddenly aware that he should probably be doing something helpful. Maddie shook her head. "My tummy hurts too much." Her small face tightened with discomfort, and Ridge felt utterly helpless. "Should I call the nurse?" "They'll come soon with medicine," Maddie said with the resigned knowledge of someone who'd been through this routine before. "Ridge?" "Yeah?" "Will you tell me a story?" Ridge panicked internally. He didn't know any kid's stories. His life wasn't exactly filled with fairy tales and happy endings. "I'm not good at stories," he admitted. "Just tell me about your motorcycle," Maddie suggested, her eyes brightening slightly. "Mom says you ride one." Ridge raised an eyebrow at the sleeping Lena. So she had talked about him after all. "It's a Harley," he began awkwardly. "A Road King, black with some silver details." "Is it loud?" Maddie asked. Ridge smiled slightly. "Yeah, it's pretty loud." "Does it go fast?" "It can." He paused. "But I'm careful." Maddie seemed to consider this. "Mom says motorcycles are dangerous." "They can be," Ridge admitted. "If you're not smart about it." Maddie's questions continued, each one simpler than the last as her energy visibly drained. After a few minutes, her eyelids began to droop again. The door opened quietly, and a doctor entered with a nurse. Lena startled awake at the sound, quickly straightening and wiping a hand across her face. "Good morning," the doctor said, her voice gentle but professional. "I'm Dr. Patel. I see our patient has a new visitor." Ridge awkwardly stood, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look in his wrinkled clothes and leather vest. Lena quickly filled the silence. "This is Ridge," she said. "Maddie's father." "Doctor." Patel nodded, showing no surprise at his appearance. "Mr. Walker, I'd like to speak with both of you about Maddie's condition, if you have a moment." Something in her tone made Ridge's stomach tighten. He and Lena followed Dr. Patel into the hallway, while the nurse remained with Maddie, checking her vitals. "I've reviewed all of Maddie's test results," Dr. Patel said, her voice low and serious. "We've confirmed our initial suspicions. Maddie has a rare autoimmune disorder called HLH, hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis." Lena made a small sound, and Ridge saw her knuckles go white as she gripped her arms. "In simple terms," Dr. Patel continued, "her immune system is attacking her own body. It's extremely rare and very aggressive." "But you can treat it, right?" Ridge asked, his voice harder than he intended. "Doctor." Patel met his eyes steadily. "We've started her on immunosuppressive therapy and steroids. In some cases, that's enough to bring it under control." "And in other cases?" Lena whispered. In more severe cases, patients require a bone marrow transplant. Dr. Patel glanced between them. I want to be very clear with both of you. This is a life-threatening illness. The next few days will be critical in determining how Maddie responds to the initial treatment. Ridge felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Just hours ago, he'd been a man with no family, no real connections. Now he stood in a hospital hallway, learning that the daughter he'd just discovered might be fighting for her life. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm patches of light across Maddie's hospital room. Ridge sat awkwardly in the chair next to her bed, watching as a nurse checked the IV lines running into Maddie's small arm. Just need to adjust this a bit, the nurse said cheerfully. Her name tag read Jenny. She smiled at Maddie. How are you feeling this morning, sunshine? Okay, Maddie said softly, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. Ridge shifted in his seat, unsure what to do with his hands or where to look. Hospitals made him uncomfortable. The smells, the beeping machines, the forced politeness. But Maddie's calm acceptance of it all amazed him. Jenny finished checking the IV and turned to Ridge. Would you like to help with her breakfast when it comes? Sometimes it helps if family encourages eating. Sure, Ridge mumbled, though he had no idea how to encourage a sick child to eat. Lena had gone home to shower and change, leaving Ridge alone with Maddie for the first time. The weight of responsibility felt strange on his shoulders. When breakfast arrived, a tray with oatmeal, apple juice, and a small cup of fruit, Ridge pulled his chair closer to the bed. Not hungry, Maddie said before he could speak, turning her face away from the tray. The nurse said you gotta eat something, Ridge said, picking up the spoon awkwardly. To get stronger. Maddie looked at him with those eyes that seemed too old for her face. My tummy hurts. Ridge set the spoon down, recognizing the stubborn look on her face. It was the same one he saw in the mirror. How about we make a deal, he said, surprising himself. You try 3 bites, and I'll tell you about the time I rode my motorcycle through the Grand Canyon. Interest flickered in Maddie's eyes. Did you really? You'll have to eat to find out, Ridge said, feeling a small spark of triumph when she reluctantly nodded. He held the spoon to her lips, and she took a tiny bite. That's 1, he counted. By the 3rd bite, Maddie was watching him expectantly. Grand Canyon story now. Ridge smiled slightly. Well, the roads curve all around the edges, and you can see straight down into this huge, deep space. All these colors in the rock, red and orange and brown. When the sun hits it right, it looks like it's on fire. As he spoke, he managed to slip in a few more spoonfuls of oatmeal. Maddie seemed to forget she was eating, caught up in his descriptions of the open road. Around noon, a different nurse came in to take Maddie's vital signs and administer medication. Are you her father? The nurse asked directly. Yeah, Ridge answered, the word still feeling foreign on his tongue. Good to see you here. Having family around really helps with recovery. She turned to Maddie. Time for your medicine, sweetheart. This might make you feel a little sleepy. Ridge watched as Maddie obediently swallowed the pills with a small sip of water. Her face scrunched up at the taste. Yucky, she declared. Always is, Ridge agreed, earning a small smile. Throughout the afternoon, Ridge learned the rhythm of hospital life. Nurses came and went. Doctors stopped by to check charts and ask questions. Maddie drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes clutching his hand when pain medications were administered. Lena returned in the late afternoon with a small duffel bag. She looked better after her brief break, though worry still lined her face. Any changes? She asked quietly. Ridge shook his head. She ate some, not much. Lena nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's good. Sometimes she won't eat anything at all. They sat in awkward silence as evening approached. Maddie slept peacefully between them, the machines beeping steadily. You don't have to stay, Lena said finally. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Ridge looked at her, then back at Maddie. Neither did you, he said simply. As twilight darkened the window, Maddie stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, looking first at Lena, then settling on Ridge. A small smile curved her lips. You're still here, she whispered. Told you I would be, Ridge answered, his voice gruff with emotion he couldn't name. Maddie reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. Will you stay tonight too, Daddy? The word hit Ridge like a physical blow. Daddy. Not Ridge. Daddy. His throat tightened, and for a terrible moment he thought he might cry right there in front of both of them. He squeezed Maddie's hand gently, unable to speak. Finally, he managed to nod. Yeah, he said hoarsely. I'll stay. The hope in Maddie's eyes made something shift inside his chest, something that had been cold and hard for years, suddenly warming, softening. For the first time since entering the hospital, Ridge felt certain he was exactly where he needed to be. Night fell over the hospital, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected the room's harsh fluorescent lights. Ridge sat alone in the chair beside Maddie's bed, his large frame uncomfortable in the small plastic seat. Lena had reluctantly gone home to get proper rest after Ridge had insisted he could handle the night shift. The quiet beeping of monitors filled the silence. Ridge watched the steady rise and fall of Maddie's chest as she slept, her small face peaceful despite everything. A strange mix of emotions churned inside him, fear unlike anything he'd ever known, and a crushing sense of responsibility that made his motorcycle club duties seem simple in comparison. What am I doing here? He whispered to himself, running a hand over his tired face. He wasn't father material. He knew nothing about kids, especially little girls. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd talked to a child before Maddie. His life was all long rides, late nights, and loyalty to his brothers, not bedtime stories and doctor's appointments. Maddie stirred in her sleep, her brow furrowing slightly. Ridge tensed, wondering if he should call a nurse. Before he could decide, her eyes fluttered open. Hi, she said softly, her voice small in the quiet room. Hey, kid, Ridge replied, leaning forward. You need something? Water? Maddie shook her head. Bad dream. Ridge shifted uncomfortably. You, want to talk about it? She looked at him with those solemn eyes. I was alone. Nobody could find me. The words hit Ridge like a punch to the gut. He hesitantly reached out and placed his large hand over her tiny one. I'm right here, he said, not going anywhere. Maddie seemed to study his face, as if checking if he meant it. Promise? Ridge nodded, surprised at how easily the word came. Promise. A nurse poked her head in, checking on them before continuing her rounds. As she left, Ridge noticed a small stack of books on the nightstand that Lena must have brought from home. Can't sleep? He asked Maddie, who was still watching him. She shook her head again. Ridge cleared his throat. Your mom left some books. You want me to read one? Maddie's face brightened instantly. The elephant book, she said, pointing to a worn paperback with a colorful cover. Ridge picked it up, examining the illustrated elephant wearing a hat. This one? It's my favorite, Maddie confirmed, shifting to make herself more comfortable. Ridge opened the book awkwardly. The last time he'd read out loud was probably in high school, and that hadn't gone well. He squinted at the first page, suddenly wishing he'd brought his reading glasses. Once there was an elephant who was different from all the other elephants, he began, his deep voice sounding strange to his own ears as he read the children's words. Maddie settled back against her pillow, watching him with complete trust. Ridge continued reading, stumbling occasionally over words but finding a rhythm as he went. The story was about an elephant who didn't fit in but eventually found where he belonged. Halfway through, Ridge glanced up to see if Maddie was still awake. She was looking at him with such open adoration that he almost lost his place. "You do good voices," she said approvingly. Ridge hadn't realized he was doing voices at all. "Thanks," he mumbled, feeling his cheeks warm slightly. He continued reading, finding himself getting invested in the elephant's journey. When he reached the part where the elephant found his family, his voice grew unexpectedly thick. He paused, clearing his throat. "Are you sad?" Maddie asked. "Nah," Ridge said quickly. It's a good story." She nodded seriously. "That's why it's my favorite." As he finished the book, Ridge realized something had shifted inside him. The fear was still there, but alongside it was something else. A feeling of rightness, of connection. For the first time since entering the hospital, reading this simple book to this fragile child, Ridge didn't feel like an imposter. "Another one?" Maddie asked hopefully. Ridge smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Sure thing," he said, reaching for the next book. "One more, then sleep. Deal?" Maddie nodded, snuggling deeper under her blanket. "Deal, Daddy." The morning light streamed through the hospital blinds, casting warm stripes across the foot of Maddie's bed. Ridge blinked awake, his neck stiff from sleeping upright in the chair. He rolled his shoulders and checked his watch. Just past 7. Somehow he'd managed to doze off after reading 3 books to Maddie, not just the promised one. She was still sleeping, her breathing steady and calm. The nurses had come and gone during the night, checking vitals and adjusting medications with practiced efficiency. Ridge had woken each time, but stayed silent, watching them work with quiet competence around his daughter. His daughter. The word still felt foreign in his mind. He stood carefully to avoid making noise and stretched his tall frame. Coffee. He needed coffee badly, but first he wanted to tidy up the books scattered across the side table from their reading marathon. As he gathered them, the elephant book fell open, and something fluttered out from between its pages. Ridge bent to pick it up. It was a photograph, worn around the edges and slightly faded. He turned it over and froze. It was him. A younger version of himself, maybe 10 years ago, leaning against his motorcycle with a rare smile on his face. He was wearing his leather vest with the club colors, hair a bit longer than he kept it now, standing in front of a sunset that turned the sky orange and gold. Ridge stared at the photo, confusion washing over him. He didn't remember this picture being taken, but that wasn't what bothered him. What was it doing in Maddie's book? "You found my picture." Ridge looked up to see Maddie awake, watching him with sleepy eyes. "Morning, kid," he said softly, holding up the photograph. "Where'd you get this?" Maddie pushed herself up against her pillows. "From the special box." Ridge pulled his chair closer to her bed. "What special box?" "The one in Mommy's closet," she said simply. "It has your name on it." Ridge felt a strange tightness in his chest. Lena had kept a box with his name on it? After all this time? "Did your mom give you this picture?" he asked carefully. Maddie shook her head. "No, I found it myself. I wasn't supposed to look in the box." Ridge nodded slowly, trying to process this information. "So your mom doesn't know you have this?" "I don't think so," Maddie said. She reached for the photo and Ridge handed it back to her. She studied it with a seriousness that seemed too old for her young face. I always knew what you looked like. A chill ran down Ridge's spine. What do you mean? From this picture, Maddie explained. She traced her small finger along the edge of the photo. I found it a long time ago. I kept it secret. Ridge leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Maddie, how did you know this was me? How did you know my name was Ridge? Maddie looked at him with those clear, innocent eyes. It said so on the box. Ridge Walker. She pronounced his full name carefully. And then I heard Mommy say it once when she was crying. Ridge felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. The thought of Lena crying over him years later made something inside him ache. When did you find this box? He asked. Last summer. I was playing hide and seek with my friend Katie. I hid in Mommy's closet behind the shoes. Maddie coughed lightly, and Ridge quickly helped her take a sip of water from the cup on the bedside table. It was in the very back, she continued after drinking. A blue box with a silver ribbon. I wasn't supposed to open it, but I did. Ridge tried to imagine the scene. A curious little girl discovering traces of a father she'd never known, piecing together a mystery that adults had tried to keep hidden. What else was in the box? He asked. Maddie's face scrunched up in concentration. Letters. A leather thing with strings. She mimicked a bracelet around her wrist. Ridge recognized the description of a braided leather bracelet he'd made for Lena years ago. He thought she would have thrown it away. And more pictures, Maddie finished. But this one was my favorite. You looked happy. Ridge glanced down at the photograph again. He had been happy that day, though he couldn't remember why. Before he could ask another question, the door opened, and Lena walked in carrying a tray of coffee and a small bag. Lena stopped in her tracks when she saw the photo in Ridge's hand. Her eyes widened, and the coffee cup in her hand tilted dangerously before she steadied it. Good morning, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I brought breakfast. Ridge held up the photograph. Maddie was just telling me about a box with my name on it. Lena's cheeks flushed as she set the tray down on the small table by the window. She glanced at Maddie, who was watching them both with curious eyes. Honey, would you mind if I talk to... Lena hesitated. If I talk to your dad for a minute in the hallway? Maddie nodded, clutching the photograph against her chest. Ridge followed Lena into the corridor, closing the door softly behind them. The hospital was coming to life. Nurses changing shifts, meal carts rolling past, the distant sound of phones ringing. You kept a box, Ridge said quietly, leaning against the wall. Lena crossed her arms, defensive. It wasn't something I planned on showing her. She found it anyway. Kids find everything, Lena sighed, running a hand through her hair. I should have hidden it better. Ridge studied her face, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the tension around her mouth. Why keep it at all, Lena? You walked away. You made it clear our life was over. It wasn't that simple. Lena's voice cracked slightly. I never wanted to leave you, Ridge. I wanted to leave the danger, the constant worry. There's a difference. Ridge shook his head. You knew who I was when we met. And you knew I was terrified after what happened to Mike's girlfriend. Lena lowered her voice. That drive-by wasn't random, Ridge. The club had enemies. When I found out I was pregnant... Her voice trailed off. So you decided I didn't deserve to know about my own child. The words came out harsher than he intended. Lena's eyes flashed. I decided our child deserved a chance to grow up without wondering if her father would come home in a body bag. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken words hanging between them. The box, Ridge finally said. What's in it? Lena looked away. Just memories. Things I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Pictures, letters, The bracelet I made you." She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Maddie told you." "Why keep them, Lena? Why not just make a clean break?" Lena finally looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because even when I was terrified of your world, I never stopped." She took a deep breath. "I kept them to remember what we had, what I gave up." Ridge felt something shift in his chest. All these years, he'd assumed she'd simply moved on, erased him from her life. The idea that she'd kept pieces of him, treasured them enough to hide them away, it changed something fundamental in how he viewed their past. "I told her about you," Lena admitted quietly. "Not everything, but enough. I told her you were brave and loyal, and that you would have loved her very much if you'd known her." Ridge's throat tightened. "Why didn't you call me when she got sick?" "I almost did. Many times." Lena wiped at a tear that had escaped. "But then she started calling for you, saying your name in her sleep. It was like she knew Ridge. Somehow she knew she needed you." They stood facing each other in the sterile hospital hallway, years of pain and misunderstanding between them. But something else was there, too. A fragile thread of the connection they'd once shared. "I'm here now," Ridge said simply. Lena nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Yes, you are." She reached out hesitantly and touched his arm, just for a moment. "We should get back to her." Ridge felt the warmth of her touch even after she pulled away. Together they turned back toward Maddie's room, moving forward into uncertain territory, not as the people they once were, but as the parents their daughter needed them to be. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Maddie's bed. Her cheeks had a hint of color that hadn't been there before, and Ridge noticed she was sitting up straighter against her pillows. "Tell me about your motorcycle," Maddie said, her voice stronger than it had been yesterday. Ridge shifted in the plastic chair beside her bed. "It's a Harley, black and chrome." "Is it super fast?" Her eyes lit up with interest. "Fast enough," Ridge said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But I don't race it or nothing. That's dangerous." Lena, who was organizing Maddie's belongings in the small closet, shot him a look. "What else?" Maddie prodded. "Does it make a loud noise?" Ridge cleared his throat. "Yeah, it rumbles. Kind of like—" He hesitated, then made a grumbling sound deep in his throat that was supposed to mimic his Harley's engine. Maddie burst into giggles, the sound light and musical in the sterile room. "That's not what a motorcycle sounds like." "No? Then what does it sound like?" Ridge challenged, surprised by the playfulness in his own voice. Maddie scrunched up her face in concentration, and then let out a high-pitched, "Vroom, vroom," that sounded more like a toy than a Harley-Davidson. Ridge chuckled, the unfamiliar sound feeling rusty in his chest. "Not even close, kid." Lena turned from the closet, a soft expression on her face as she watched them. Their eyes met briefly over Maddie's head, and something warm passed between them. "Did you ever crash it?" Maddie asked, pulling their attention back to her. "Just once," Ridge admitted. "I was young and stupid. Learned my lesson." "Did it hurt?" "Broke my arm in 2 places." Ridge rolled up his sleeve to show a long, faded scar. "That's why you always wear a helmet and don't show off." Lena's eyebrows rose in surprise, as if she hadn't expected such responsible advice from him. "Do you have any stories about your motorcycle?" Maddie asked, settling back against her pillows. Ridge rubbed his chin. "Well, there was this one time in Arizona." He launched into a story about getting caught in a desert thunderstorm, carefully editing out the parts about outrunning angry locals and the beer-soaked night that had preceded it. He wasn't a natural storyteller. His words came out choppy, and sometimes he backtracked to add details he'd forgotten. but Maddie hung on every word, laughing at his description of being so soaked that his boots squished for days afterward. Even Lena smiled as she sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. When he finished, Maddie was still smiling, but her eyelids were getting heavy. "That was a good story," she murmured. "Will you tell me another one later?" "Sure thing," Ridge said, surprised at how easily the promise came. A nurse entered with Maddie's medication, checking her vitals with quiet efficiency. "Her numbers are looking better today," she said with an encouraging smile. "The doctor will be by in about an hour." After the nurse left, Maddie dozed off, her breathing deeper and more relaxed than it had been the day before. Ridge watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, a tightness in his own. "She seems better," he whispered to Lena. Lena nodded cautiously. "She has good days and bad days. This is definitely a good one." Ridge stood up, stretching his stiff back. "I need some air. Going to step outside for a minute." Lena touched his arm lightly. "Thank you for the stories. She's never laughed like that since being admitted." Something warm unfurled in Ridge's chest at her words. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and headed for the door. Outside in the hospital parking lot, Ridge took deep breaths of the fresh air. The afternoon was beginning to fade, shadows lengthening across the asphalt. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at it for a long moment before making a decision. He scrolled through his contacts and hit call. "Bear, it's Ridge." He paused, listening to the surprised greeting from the other end. "Yeah, I know it's been a few days. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important." Another pause. "No, I'm not in trouble. Not that kind anyway. I need the club's help." The morning sunlight poured through the hospital windows as Ridge stood by Maddie's bed, helping her adjust her pillows. Dark circles ringed his eyes from another night of broken sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "You look tired, Daddy," Maddie said, studying his face with concern that seemed too mature for her young years. The word Daddy still hit Ridge like a physical force every time she said it. He cleared his throat. "I'm fine, kid. Just not used to these fancy hotel accommodations." Lena entered with a foam cup of coffee, which she handed to Ridge. "It's terrible, but it's hot," she said with a small smile. "Thanks," Ridge murmured, their fingers brushing as he took the cup. A commotion in the hallway made them all look toward the door. The deep rumble of male voices mixed with a nurse's concerned tone grew louder. "Sounds like they're here," Ridge said, setting down his coffee. "Who's here?" Lena asked, tension creeping into her voice. Before Ridge could answer, the door pushed open. A massive man with a salt and pepper beard and arms covered in tattoos filled the doorframe. Despite his intimidating size, he removed his leather cap respectfully as he entered. "Bear," Ridge nodded. "Ridge." The big man's eyes softened as they landed on Maddie in the hospital bed. "And this must be the little lady we've been hearing about." Behind him, 4 more men crowded into the small room. They all wore leather vests with patches, their expressions a mixture of awkwardness and genuine concern. Lena stiffened, instinctively moving closer to Maddie's bed. "It's okay," Ridge said quietly to her. "These are my brothers." He turned to the group. "This is Bear, Diesel, Hawk, Tiny, and Doc." "Doc isn't actually a doctor," the shortest of the group clarified with a crooked smile. "Just good at patching up idiots who've had too much to drink." Maddie giggled at that, her eyes wide with curiosity. Bear approached the bed slowly, as if worried his size might frighten the child. "We brought some things," he said, nodding to Hawk, who held up a large duffel bag. "You called your club?" Lena whispered to Ridge, surprise evident in her voice. Ridge nodded. Thought we could use some backup. Hawk began pulling items from the bag. We got coloring books, some of those fuzzy pen things the girls like, a portable DVD player with movies. And snacks, Tiny added, producing a paper bag. Hospital food is garbage. We brought real stuff. Cookies my old lady baked, some decent sandwiches. And this, Bear said, producing a small, soft teddy bear wearing a miniature leather vest with the club's emblem. Every kid needs something to hang on to when things get rough. Maddie's face lit up as she reached for the teddy bear. He looks like you, she said to Bear, which made the huge man's weathered face break into a surprised smile. Guess he does at that, Bear agreed, clearly pleased. Lena's posture gradually relaxed as she watched the biker's gentle interactions with Maddie. The men moved carefully in the small space, their voices lowered, treating the medical equipment with cautious respect. Doc approached Lena. Ridge filled us in. We're here for whatever you folks need. Blood donations, fundraising, or just somebody to sit with her so you two can get some real sleep. Thank you, Lena said, her voice catching slightly. Diesel, a lanky man with a full-sleeve tattoo, pulled out a chair for Lena. Ma'am, you look like you could use a break. We'll keep her entertained for a bit if you want. Ridge watched as Maddie showed her new teddy bear to each of the men, who responded with exaggerated interest. The room that had felt so clinical and cold now hummed with warmth and life. Tiny was demonstrating a magic trick with a coin, making Maddie laugh when it disappeared behind her ear. Hawk carefully set up the DVD player, explaining the movie choices with serious consideration of what might be appropriate. Your brothers aren't what I expected, Lena said quietly to Ridge, standing close beside him. Ridge nodded. They're good men. Rough around the edges, but good where it counts. Maddie's laughter rang out again as Doc told her an animated story, his hands gesturing wildly in the air. The sound filled the sterile room, transforming it into something that felt almost like home. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Ridge felt the tightness in his chest ease slightly. His two worlds, the one he'd built over decades and the one he'd just discovered, were no longer in conflict but merging into something unexpected and beautiful. Maddie looked up, her eyes finding Ridge across the room. Her smile, brighter than it had been in days, spoke volumes. The room that had held so much fear now overflowed with warmth, laughter, and hope. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maddie's hospital room as the steady stream of activity continued. Ridge leaned against the wall, watching with amazement as his club brothers transformed the sterile environment into something that buzzed with purpose. Bear sat in the blood donation chair down the hall, his massive arm extended as a nervous technician inserted the needle. The technician had never seen such a large vein before. Take all you need, darlin', Bear rumbled. Got plenty to spare for the little princess. 3 other club members waited their turn, sleeves already rolled up. Diesel, who hated needles but wouldn't admit it, kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting them silently. Back in Maddie's room, Doc had set up an impromptu fundraising headquarters at the small table by the window. His laptop open, he typed with surprising speed. Got 5 more businesses downtown willing to match donations, Doc announced. And I set up that online thing, what did they call it? GoFundMe, already at $8,000. Lena nearly spilled her coffee. $8,000 already? Doc shrugged like it was nothing. Club's got connections. People respect Ridge. Lena glanced at Ridge, a new understanding in her eyes. The man she'd feared for his dangerous connections was using those very same connections to help their daughter. Outside in the hallway, Hawk stood with his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, that's right. We need more O-negative. The kid's got a rare condition. He listened, then nodded. Thanks, brother. Any of your chapter that can donate, we'd appreciate it. Ridge stepped into the hall. What was that about? Called the Richmond chapter, Hawk explained. They're sending 15 guys to donate tomorrow. Tacoma chapter's organizing a benefit ride next weekend. A nurse pushing a medication cart paused, overhearing their conversation. She'd been wary when the leather-clad men had first arrived, but now she offered a warm smile. Your friends have been incredible, she told Ridge. Dr. Matthews was skeptical at first, but we've never seen such a response for a patient before. Ridge nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. They're good men. Back inside, Tiny sat cross-legged on the floor beside Maddie's bed, helping her sort through get-well cards that had started arriving from club members' families. His enormous hands looked absurdly large next to Maddie's tiny ones. This one's from my daughter, Tiny explained, pointing to a glitter-covered card. She's a bit older than you, but she wanted you to know she's praying for you. Maddie ran her fingers over the sparkly surface. It's beautiful. Tell her thank you. A hospital administrator appeared in the doorway, looking slightly uncomfortable. Mr. Walker? Could I speak with you for a moment? Ridge followed her into the hall, bracing himself for complaints about the unconventional visitors. I wanted to let you know, the administrator began. Your group's blood drive is the largest we've seen in years. We've had to call in extra staff. Ridge blinked in surprise. And the fundraising... She checked her clipboard. We've already received calls from 3 motorcycle clubs around the state offering to help with Madeline's medical expenses. That's just how we do things, Ridge said simply. When Ridge returned to the room, he found Lena talking with Doc about insurance forms and medical billing. Her initial wariness had given way to gratitude as she realized these men were here to shoulder burdens, not create them. Dr. Matthews entered, looking tired but pleased. Madeline's latest blood work shows slight improvement, he announced, and the additional blood donations are incredibly helpful. Her blood type is quite rare. Lena squeezed Ridge's arm in relief. As the doctor explained treatment options, Ridge surveyed the room, his brothers, his daughter, Lena, and felt something shift inside him. For years, he'd believed his life as a biker made him unfit for family, too dangerous to be around those he loved. It was why Lena had kept Maddie from him. But now, watching his club mobilize with military precision to help his daughter, Ridge realized something profound. The very world he'd thought would harm his family might actually be what saved them. His brotherhood, his connections, his reputation. All of it was being channeled into Maddie's fight. The lifestyle he'd been ashamed to bring to a family was now bringing hope to his daughter. Evening shadows stretched across Maddie's hospital room as the bustle of the day settled into a peaceful quiet. The last of Ridge's club brothers had left after making promises to return tomorrow. Only a few get-well cards and a stuffed bear wearing a tiny leather vest remained as evidence of their visit. Ridge sat in the chair beside Maddie's bed, watching as the nurse checked her vital signs. The woman nodded with satisfaction. Her numbers are looking better, the nurse said softly. Blood pressure's stabilized, and her temperature's normal for the first time in days. Lena, who'd stepped out to grab dinner from the cafeteria, returned with a tray. Relief softened her tired features when she heard the news. Really? She asked, setting the tray down. That's the best news we've had all week. The nurse adjusted Maddie's blanket. Dr. Matthews thinks all those blood donations are starting to help. Plus, she smiled at Ridge, sometimes having family close by makes all the difference. After the nurse left, Maddie stirred from her light sleep. Her eyes, less glassy than before, found Ridge's face. You stayed, she said, her voice small but clearer. Course I did, kid. Ridge leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Not going anywhere. Maddie's pale lips formed a smile. The big men with the leather jackets were nice. They liked you too. Ridge awkwardly patted her hand. Tiny's already asking when he can visit again. He showed me pictures of his motorcycle. Maddie's eyes brightened with interest. It's so big and shiny. Lena brought a cup of water to Maddie's lips. After she drank, Maddie looked back at Ridge. Do you have a motorcycle too? Ridge nodded. Sure do. Had it for 15 years. What color is it? Black, with some silver parts. Is it fast? Maddie asked, her curiosity growing stronger by the minute. Ridge glanced at Lena, who gave a slight nod of permission. It can be, he admitted, but I'm always careful. Maddie's fingers plucked at her blanket. Mom has a picture of you on your motorcycle. In that box I found. Lena's cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look away when Ridge glanced at her. You kept pictures, Ridge said quietly. A few, Lena admitted. Couldn't quite let go of everything. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Maddie broke the silence. When I get better, can I see your motorcycle? Ridge felt something warm spread through his chest. When you get better, not if. The simple faith of a child who didn't know to doubt. Sure thing, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. You can sit on it if you want. Maddie's eyes widened. Really? Really? It's parked right outside. Lena moved to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. You can see it from here, Maddie, look. Ridge helped adjust Maddie's bed so she could peer out the window. 3 floors below, his Harley sat in the parking lot, moonlight gleaming off its chrome. It's beautiful, Maddie whispered. Ridge watched her face, saw the wonder there, and felt something crack inside him. This tiny girl who shared his blood was looking at his bike the same way he had when he was young, like it represented freedom and adventure. Maybe someday, Maddie said quietly, when I'm all better, we could go for a ride? The question hung in the air. Ridge felt Lena's gaze on him, not disapproving but cautious. He swallowed hard. Yeah, kid. Ridge's voice came out rough. When you're better and a bit bigger, we'll go for a ride someday. Maddie's smile brightened the whole room. Promise? Promise. He held out his pinky finger, remembering somehow that this was how kids made serious promises. Maddie linked her tiny finger with his large one. Where will we go? She asked, settling back against her pillows but keeping her eyes on him. Ridge thought for a moment. There's this road that follows the coast. You can see the ocean the whole way. Dolphins sometimes jump in the waves. I'd like that, Maddie said, her eyelids growing heavy. As she drifted toward sleep, Ridge sat watching her, imagining a future he'd never allowed himself to picture before. Teaching Maddie to ride, showing her all his favorite places, being the father he never thought he could be. Late that night, the hospital floor was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Ridge had convinced Lena to go home for a few hours of decent sleep in a real bed. She'd resisted at first, but the dark circles under her eyes told the truth her words wouldn't admit. She was exhausted. I'll call if anything changes, Ridge had promised. Even something small. Now he sat in the dimness of Maddie's room, the only light coming from the monitors and the glow of the nurses stationed down the hall. Maddie slept peacefully, her breathing even and steady. Ridge leaned back in the chair that had become his second home, letting his eyes close for just a moment. The sound of Maddie's breathing had become a comfort to him, something he found himself listening for without even realizing it. In just a few short days, that gentle rhythm had become as familiar to him as the rumble of his Harley's engine. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, something felt different. Ridge opened his eyes, instantly alert. Years of riding with the club had taught him to wake fully and quickly. His gaze went straight to Maddie. Her forehead glistened with sweat. Her breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. Maddie? Ridge leaned forward, touching her arm gently. She felt hot. Too hot. She didn't respond, just shifted restlessly under the thin hospital blanket. A soft whimper escaped her lips. Ridge reached for the call button, pressing it firmly. "Hey kid, you okay?" His voice sounded strange in his own ears, tight and afraid. The monitor beside Maddie's bed began to beep faster. Numbers flashed, turning from reassuring green to warning yellow. Ridge pressed the call button again, more urgently. "Come on," he muttered. Maddie's eyes fluttered open, but they weren't focused. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice thin and frightened. "It hurts." "I know, kid. Help's coming." Ridge took her small hand in his. It burned against his skin. "Where does it hurt?" "Everywhere," she whimpered. The door swung open as a night nurse rushed in. One glance at the monitors and she stepped back into the hallway, calling sharply, "Need help in 304." She returned to Maddie's side, checking the IV line, her movements quick but controlled. "When did this start?" she asked Ridge. "Just now. She was fine. Then she wasn't." The monitor's beeping suddenly changed to a more urgent alarm. The numbers flashed red. Maddie's breathing became more labored, and her eyes rolled back. "She's seizing!" The nurse hit a button on the wall, and suddenly the room was flooded with harsh light. "Code Blue 304, she called into the intercom. Ridge stood frozen, still holding Maddie's hand as her small body began to shake. "What's happening?" His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The room filled with people in seconds, doctors and nurses moving with practiced urgency. Someone gently but firmly pulled Ridge back. "Sir, you need to step out," a male nurse said, guiding him toward the door. "I can't leave her," Ridge protested, his eyes fixed on Maddie's trembling form as medical staff surrounded her bed. "BP's dropping," someone called out. "Starting another line." "Get me the crash cart!" The words swirled around Ridge, making no sense yet carrying terrible meaning. The male nurse's grip on his arm tightened. "Sir, please. Let them work. Every second counts." Ridge found himself in the hallway, the door closing in front of him. Through the small window, he could see people moving around Maddie's bed, blocking his view of her. The alarms continued to sound, muffled now by the closed door. He pressed his palms against the cold wall, trying to steady himself. His heart hammered in his chest. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when she'd just started to get better. Not when he'd just found her. Ridgewalker, who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, who'd ridden through storms that sent other bikers seeking shelter, who'd earned respect in a world where respect came at a high price, stood helpless in a hospital hallway, terrified in a way he'd never been before. Ridge slumped against the wall outside Maddie's room, sliding down until he hit the cold linoleum floor. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, too bright and too harsh. Every few seconds, another doctor or nurse rushed past him into the room, their faces tight with concentration. Nobody stopped to tell him anything. Time stretched like taffy. Had it been minutes or hours since the alarms first sounded? Ridge couldn't tell. His phone sat heavy in his pocket. He should call Lena, but what would he say? The words wouldn't come. A cleaning lady pushed her cart past, glancing at him with sympathy. Ridge barely noticed. His mind kept replaying every moment with Maddie since he'd arrived at the hospital. Her small hand reaching for his. The way she'd called him Daddy with such certainty. The smile that had started to appear more often as she improved. Had it all been a cruel joke? To find out he had a daughter only to lose her? Ridge pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His throat felt tight, like something was stuck there. He hadn't cried since he was a teenager, not even when his mother died. Crying wasn't something men in his world did, but now, the pressure building behind his eyes threatened to break through. "Maybe Lena was right all along," he whispered to the empty hallway. "Maybe I was never meant for this." The image of Maddie's tiny body convulsing haunted him. How quickly things had changed. Just hours ago, they'd been talking about motorcycle rides someday, about teaching her to fish, about all the things fathers and daughters did together. Now doctors fought to keep her alive, and he couldn't do a damn thing to help. Ridge's phone vibrated. A text from Lena. "Everything okay?" His fingers hovered over the screen. What could he possibly write? Before he could decide, the hospital doors at the end of the hallway swished open. The sound of heavy boots on linoleum made Ridge look up. Bull, the oldest member of his club, walked toward him. The big man's gray beard reached halfway down his chest, and his leather vest was covered in patches and pins from decades on the road. Behind him came two more club members, Decker and Tiny. Bull stopped a few feet away, looking down at Ridge. "Got your message earlier. Thought we'd come back. See how the little one's doing?" Ridge swallowed hard, nodding toward the closed door. They're working on her." Bull's weathered face didn't change expression, but his eyes softened. Without a word, he lowered himself to sit on the floor beside Ridge, his knees cracking in protest. Decker and Tiny settled in nearby, silent sentinels in leather and denim. For a long while, nobody spoke. The muffled sounds from Maddie's room continued. Urgent voices, beeping machines, the squeak of rubber soles. "I keep thinking," Ridge finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that Lena had it right, keeping Maddie away from me, from this life." Bull grunted. "That right? Look what's happening. I've been here less than a week, and she's—" Ridge couldn't finish the sentence. "You think you caused this?" Bull asked, his voice gruff but gentle. "That some higher power is punishing you?" Ridge didn't answer. The thought had been circling his mind since the alarms first sounded. "That's horseshit," Bull said flatly. "Kids get sick. It happens. Has nothing to do with you being here or not. But if I'd known about her sooner, then what? You'd have quit the club? Become some regular Joe working 9 to 5? Would that have stopped whatever's happening to her right now?" Ridge stared at his hands. They were calloused from years of working on bikes, from fights, from a lifetime of hard living. Not a father's hands. "Being there," Bull said quietly. "That's what makes a man. Not what you were, what you choose now." Ridge looked up, meeting the older biker's steady gaze. "We're here," Bull added, gesturing to the other members. "For both of you." The door to Maddie's room opened, and a doctor stepped out. Ridge scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. Bull rose beside him, one hand resting firmly on Ridge's shoulder. A silent reminder that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. Dawn painted the hospital walls with pale yellow light. Ridge hadn't moved from his chair beside Maddie's bed all night. The doctors had stabilized her, but they'd used words like critical condition and next 24 hours. Words that hung in the air like smoke. Maddie lay still, smaller somehow than she'd been yesterday. Tubes ran from her arms, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths beneath the thin blanket. The machine beside her bed beeped steadily, the only reassurance that she was still fighting. Ridge rubbed his eyes. They burned from lack of sleep. His back ached from the uncomfortable chair, but those discomforts felt right somehow, like a penance. "You should get some coffee." Ridge turned to see Lena standing in the doorway. She looked as tired as he felt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "I'm fine," he said automatically. Lena stepped into the room, setting her purse on the small table. "You haven't slept?" "Neither have you." She shrugged, moving to Maddie's side and gently brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. The gesture was so tender, it made Ridge's chest hurt. "What did the doctor tell you?" Lena asked quietly. Ridge looked down at his hands. "That her body is fighting hard. That the next day is important." He paused. "That we should prepare ourselves." Lena nodded, her eyes never leaving Maddie's face. "She's strong, stronger than they know." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping. Ridge watched Lena with their daughter, seeing the gentle way she checked the blankets, adjusted the pillow, all the small acts of love that came so naturally to her. "You were right," Ridge said suddenly. Lena glanced up. "About what?" "About keeping her from me." The words felt like rocks in his mouth. "About all of it." Lena's eyebrows drew together. "Ridge, no, look at her." He gestured helplessly at Maddie. "She was fine before I showed up, and now... You can't possibly think this is because of you." Ridge stood up, his legs stiff from sitting so long. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below, at normal people starting normal days. "I keep thinking about what you said, about my lifestyle being dangerous." He pressed his palm against the cool glass. "Maybe it's not just the obvious dangers. Maybe it's just me, who I am." "That's not fair," Lena said. "To you or to her?" "Isn't it?" Ridge turned back to face her. "Look at my life, Lena. What did I have to offer a child? A father who disappears for days on runs? Who has enemies? Who lives by a different set of rules?" Lena was quiet for a moment, watching him. "Do you know why she found that photo of you?" Ridge frowned. "What?" "The one in her book. The one she said she found in my closet." Lena moved away from the bed, closer to him. "She was having a rough day. The treatments were making her sick. And she asked me. She asked if her father was strong." Ridge's throat tightened. "I told her yes, that her father was the strongest man I'd ever known." Lena's voice softened. "That night she must have gone looking. She found that box with your things. The next day she had your photo." Ridge looked away, blinking hard. "I kept you from her because I was scared," Lena continued. "I told myself it was for her protection. But maybe..." She sighed. "Maybe I was protecting myself too. From facing you again. From sharing her." "Lena, no, let me finish." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I was wrong to keep her from you. But you're wrong if you think she'd be better off without you now." Ridge looked back at Maddie, so still in the hospital bed. "She needs you, Ridge, not some perfect father from a storybook. You." Lena reached out, hesitantly touching his arm. "The man who stayed all night. The man who read to her even though you stumbled over the words. The man whose friends came to give blood and raise money." Ridge stood frozen, Lena's hand warm on his arm. "Maddie needs you now more than ever," Lena whispered. "And honestly, so do I." The doctor nodded solemnly as he finished explaining Maddie's condition. His voice had the practiced steadiness of someone who delivered difficult news daily. "You can go in now," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "Just prepare yourself. She's stable but unresponsive." Ridge stood motionless in the hallway. The words bounced around his head like stray bullets. Stable. Unresponsive. Critical, but fighting. Medical terms that couldn't capture the little girl who'd reached for his hand, who'd called him Daddy, with complete certainty. "Thanks, Doc," he managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. The doctor placed a brief, professional hand on Ridge's shoulder before walking away. Outside Maddie's room, Ridge paused. Through the small window in the door, he could see the machines, the tubes, the small shape beneath the blankets. His hands felt clumsy suddenly, too large and rough for this delicate space. He pushed the door open anyway. The room was eerily quiet compared to before. The frantic energy of the emergency had been replaced by the steady, methodical rhythm of machines keeping watch. Beep, whoosh, beep, whoosh. The mechanical sounds of life continuing against the odds. Maddie looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her skin was pale against the white sheets, making the dark circles under her eyes more pronounced. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, even breaths that seemed too fragile to trust. Ridge approached slowly, as if afraid his heavy footsteps might somehow disturb her precarious balance between worlds. He lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, the plastic creaking under his weight. For a long moment, he just looked at her. This child who shared his blood. This daughter he hadn't known existed until a few days ago. This little fighter who somehow knew him, who had called for him when she needed someone most. "Hey, kid," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The machines continued their steady rhythm, uninterrupted. Ridge leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His leather jacket felt out of place here among the sterile whites and blues of the hospital room. He thought about taking it off but couldn't bring himself to move away from her, even for a second. "The nurses say you can hear me," he continued. "I don't know if that's true or just something they tell worried parents." He paused. Parents, still getting used to that word. A memory flashed through his mind. Maddie's small hand reaching for his, her breathing steadying at his touch. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only days. "Your mom told me you found my picture," he said. "Said you were looking for someone strong." Ridge swallowed hard. "Truth is, I never felt strong until you grabbed my hand. Never had much to be strong for, I guess." Outside the window, the day was bright and clear, a stark contrast to the dim quiet of the room. Cars moved through the parking lot below. People walked in and out of the hospital entrance. The world continued its normal rhythm, while everything in his had changed. "I spent most of my life running," Ridge admitted. "Chasing the next road, the next ride. Thought that was freedom." He shook his head slightly. "Turns out I was just running away. From this. From what scared me most." His gaze fell on Maddie's hand, so small against the white sheet. He remembered how naturally it had fit in his own. Ridge reached out, his calloused fingers hovering uncertainly above her smaller ones. Then gently, so gently it barely disturbed the blanket, he took her hand in his. "I'm not running anymore, Maddie," he promised, his voice catching. "I'm right here, and I swear to you I will never leave you again." The machines continued their steady rhythm. Beep, whoosh, beep, whoosh. Outside, the world kept moving. But in that room, Ridge Walker sat perfectly still, his daughter's hand in his, waiting for her to find her way back. Hours stretched into a slow eternity in the quiet hospital room. The afternoon sunlight crept across the floor, painting golden rectangles that shifted with the passing minutes. Ridge hadn't moved from Maddie's bedside. His large frame remained hunched in the small plastic chair, her tiny hand still held gently in his. Nurses came and went. They checked machines, adjusted tubes, and made notes on clipboards. Some offered him coffee or suggested he take a break. Ridge acknowledged them with nods but never released Maddie's hand. His back ached, and his legs had grown stiff, but these discomforts barely registered. "Your club called again," he told the sleeping child. "Big Mike says they're organizing a blood drive just for you. Can you believe that? Bunch of scary-looking guys in leather, all lining up to help. The steady beeping of monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to his words. Through the window, the afternoon had begun to fade, shadows lengthening across the room. Never thought I'd see the day, Ridge continued, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Those guys haven't set foot in a hospital voluntarily in their lives, not unless someone was patching up bullet holes or road rash. He shifted slightly, trying to ease the tightness in his shoulders without letting go of her hand. Your mom brought you some clean pajamas, he said, nodding toward a small bag on the windowsill. Pink ones with little stars. Said they're your favorite. He paused. Guess I've got a lot to learn about what you like. A nurse entered quietly, checking Maddie's vitals with practiced efficiency. She offered Ridge a small smile. You're good to keep talking to her, she said softly. It helps, even if it doesn't seem like it. After she left, Ridge cleared his throat. The talking felt strange. He'd never been a man of many words, but something about the nurse's encouragement strengthened his resolve. When I was about your age, he began, I had this little toy motorcycle. Nothing fancy, just die-cast metal with wheels that really turned. Used to push it around for hours, making engine noises. He smiled faintly at the memory. My old man took it away when he was drinking one night. Never saw it again. He rubbed his thumb gently over the back of Maddie's hand. First thing I ever bought with my own money was a real motorcycle. Just a beat-up old thing, but man... His voice softened. First time I fired it up, felt like I'd found something I'd been missing my whole life. Outside the window, the hospital parking lot lights flickered on as evening approached. The room grew dimmer, with only the soft glow of medical equipment illuminating their faces. Thought freedom was about being alone, Ridge continued, about not having anyone who could take things from you. He swallowed hard. Never figured out it was the other way around. That having someone to come back to, that's the real freedom. A nurse appeared briefly to turn on a small lamp in the corner, bathing the room in a gentle, warm glow before disappearing again. Ridge hardly noticed. Your mom told me you like stories, he said. Said you've got books stacked higher than your bed at home. He chuckled softly. Never was much of a reader myself, but I've got stories. Real ones. Might not be as good as your books, but they're true. He told her about desert sunrises viewed from lonely highways, about mountain roads that curved like sleeping snakes, about small towns with one traffic light and the best pie he'd ever tasted. As he spoke, his voice grew steadier, more confident. The words came easier now, flowing from places inside him he hadn't known existed. When you're better, he said, I'll take you to this little diner I know. Makes pancakes shaped like whatever you want. Bears, hearts, stars, you name it. He squeezed her hand gently. What do you think? Pancakes shaped like motorcycles? The room fell quiet again, save for the steady beeping of monitors. Ridge watched the gentle rise and fall of Maddie's chest, counting each breath like a prayer. And then, so slight he might have imagined it, he felt movement against his palm. Maddie's fingers twitched, just barely, but enough to send his heart racing. Ridge leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Maddie, he whispered, hope cracking his voice. I'm right here, kid. I'm right here. Her fingers twitched again, a tiny flutter against his calloused palm. The door to Maddie's room swung open quietly. Dr. Chen entered with two other doctors, their faces serious but not grim. Ridge straightened in his chair, his hand still firmly holding Maddie's. Every muscle in his body tensed as he searched their expressions for news. Dr. Chen approached the bed, clipboard in hand. The gentle beeping of monitors seemed to grow louder in the silence. Mr. Walker, she said, her voice measured and professional. We've been monitoring Maddie closely since the crisis last night. Ridge nodded, his throat too tight for words. Her most recent tests show signs of stabilization, Dr. Chen continued. Her numbers are improving, slowly but consistently. The treatment appears to be having a positive effect. Ridge exhaled shakily. What does that mean exactly? His voice came out rough, like sandpaper. One of the other doctors, a younger man with kind eyes, stepped forward. It means she's fighting back, sir. Her body is responding to the medication better than we initially expected. She's still in critical condition, Dr. Chen added carefully. I want to be very clear about that. But the immediate danger has lessened somewhat. Ridge looked down at Maddie's pale face, the tubes and wires making her seem so small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her eyelids remained closed, dark lashes resting against her cheeks. When will she wake up? He asked. We can't say for certain, Doctor, Chen replied. Her body needs rest to heal, but those hand movements you reported are an encouraging sign. They suggest neurological function is intact. The younger doctor checked one of the monitors. Her oxygen levels have improved since this morning. That's another positive indicator. Ridge nodded, trying to process their words. Hope felt dangerous, like a luxury he couldn't afford. So what happens now? He asked. Dr. Chen made a note on her clipboard. We continue the current treatment protocol. Monitor her closely. Take it hour by hour. We're cautiously optimistic, the third doctor added, but I want to emphasize the cautiously part. She's not out of the woods yet. Right, Ridge said, his thumb unconsciously tracing small circles on the back of Maddie's hand. I understand. The doctors continued their examination, checking machines and reviewing charts. Ridge watched their every move, searching for additional clues in their body language, in the way they looked at Maddie. After they finished, Dr. Chen paused by the door. Try to get some rest yourself, Mr. Walker. There's a decent chance she'll be more responsive tomorrow. You'll want to be rested for that. When they left, the room felt different somehow. The air seemed lighter, the beeping of the machines less ominous. Lena appeared in the doorway minutes later, her face anxious. I saw the doctors leaving. Did they say anything? Ridge nodded. She's stabilizing. Still critical, but better. Lena's shoulders sagged with relief. She crossed to the other side of Maddie's bed and gently brushed a strand of hair from their daughter's forehead. I brought you this, she said, holding out a paper bag. Sandwich from the cafeteria. You haven't eaten all day. Ridge took the bag with a nod of thanks. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until that moment. As he unwrapped the sandwich, Lena settled into a chair on the opposite side of the bed. They sat in shared silence, the beeping monitors creating a rhythm between them. She moved her hand again, Ridge said after a while. About an hour ago? Lena's eyes brightened. Really? Ridge nodded. Just a little, but the doctor said it's a good sign. Outside the window, the hospital parking lot lights cast a soft glow through the blinds. Somewhere down the hall, a meal cart rattled past. Normal hospital sounds that had seemed threatening before now felt almost comforting, signs of ordinary life continuing. Ridge finished his sandwich and crumpled the wrapper. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to take a full, deep breath. The tightness in his chest eased slightly. Not gone completely, he wasn't foolish enough to think they were past danger, but loosened just enough to make breathing easier. He settled back in his chair, still holding Maddie's hand, and permitted himself something he'd been afraid to feel until now. A small, cautious sense of relief. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital blinds, painting stripes of golden light across Maddie's bed. Ridge sat in the same chair he'd occupied for hours, one hand still gently holding hers, the other turning pages of a dog-eared book he'd found in the waiting room. He wasn't really reading, just needed something to do with his eyes, while his mind remained fixed on each beep of the monitors, each rise and fall of Maddie's chest. Lena had stepped out to make some calls, updating family members about Maddie's slight improvement. The room felt peaceful in a way it hadn't before, as if the crisis had passed through like a storm, leaving calm in its wake. Ridge glanced up from the book to check Maddie's face, something he did every few minutes without thinking. This time, his heart jumped. Her eyelashes fluttered, just slightly. He set the book down, leaning forward. "Maddie?" he whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. Her eyelids trembled again, then slowly, with what seemed like tremendous effort, they opened. Just a crack at first, then a little wider. Her eyes, the same deep brown as his own, looked cloudy and unfocused. "Hey there," Ridge said, his voice catching. "Hey, kiddo." Maddie blinked slowly, her gaze drifting around the ceiling before finding his face. For a heart-stopping moment, he wondered if she recognized him. Then her lips curved upward, the smallest, weakest smile he'd ever seen, but unmistakably meant for him. "Ridge," she whispered, her voice so faint he barely heard it. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm here. I'm right here." She swallowed with difficulty, her dry lips sticking together. "Thirsty?" Ridge reached for the small cup of ice chips the nurse had left. With shaking hands, he carefully placed one between her lips. "Just let it melt," he instructed softly. Maddie closed her eyes as the ice melted in her mouth. When she opened them again, they seemed a little clearer. "You stayed," she said. Ridge nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He reached for the call button and pressed it, his eyes never leaving her face. "Told you," Maddie murmured, that faint smile returning. "Knew you'd stay?" A nurse bustled in, stopping short when she saw Maddie's open eyes. "Well, hello there," she said, her professional composure barely containing her excitement. "Let me get Dr. Chen right away." As the nurse hurried out, Ridge found his voice again. "Your mom will be back any minute. She's going to be so happy to see you awake." Maddie's fingers tightened weakly around his. "You look tired," she observed, her words slightly slurred, but clear enough. Ridge let out a choked laugh. "Yeah, well, somebody gave us quite a scare." Her eyebrows drew together in concern. "Sorry." No, Ridge said quickly. "Don't you apologize, not for anything." The room door burst open as Lena rushed in, her face lighting up when she saw Maddie's open eyes. "Oh my God," she gasped, hurrying to the bedside. "Oh, sweetheart." Tears streamed down Lena's face as she bent to kiss Maddie's forehead. "Hi, Mom," Maddie whispered. Dr. Chen arrived moments later, quickly checking Maddie's vitals and responses. Ridge and Lena stood back, hands clasped together without either of them realizing when that had happened. "Well, young lady," Dr. Chen said with genuine warmth, "you certainly know how to make an entrance back into the land of the awake. Your numbers are looking better by the hour." As the doctor continued her examination, Ridge watched Maddie's face. Despite her weakness, there was something different in her eyes now. A spark, a presence that had been missing. Her gaze followed people around the room. She responded to questions, even managed another small smile when the doctor made a gentle joke. While Dr. Chen spoke quietly to Lena about next steps, Ridge felt something shift inside him, like a weight lifting from his chest. He recognized it suddenly, the certainty that Maddie was going to survive. It wasn't just the doctor's encouraging words or the improved numbers on the monitors. It was something he saw in Maddie herself, a resilience, a determination that mirrored his own. She was fighting. And she was winning. The morning after Maddie first opened her eyes, Ridge brought her a stuffed bear from the gift shop downstairs. It wasn't much, just a small brown bear with a red bow tie. but Maddie's face lit up as if he'd given her the moon. "What should we name him?" Ridge asked, perching on the edge of her bed. Maddie studied the bear thoughtfully, her small fingers tracing the bow tie. "Ryder," she decided, "because he came from you." Ridge felt that strange tightness in his chest again, the one that seemed to happen whenever Maddie said something that hit him straight in the heart. Each day brought small but significant improvements. On Tuesday, Maddie sat up on her own for 15 minutes. By Wednesday, she was able to eat a few spoonfuls of applesauce without feeling sick. Thursday, she laughed at a silly joke Ridge told her, a real laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Through it all, Ridge remained a constant presence. He learned the names of every nurse on the floor. He memorized Maddie's medication schedule. He became an expert at adjusting her pillows just the way she liked them. "You don't have to stay all the time," Lena told him one evening, as they shared a quick dinner of vending machine sandwiches in the family waiting area. "Your club must need you back." Ridge shook his head. "They understand. Some of the guys are handling my work. Besides, I've got years to make up for." The weekend brought even more progress. Dr. Chen allowed Maddie to try walking to the bathroom instead of using the bedpan. Ridge and Lena stood on either side of her, their hands hovering near her elbows as she took shaky steps across the room. "I can do it myself," Maddie insisted, though her legs trembled with the effort. "We know you can, tough girl," Ridge said. "We're just your backup." When she made it all the way there and back without help, the pride on her face made Ridge's throat tight again. On Monday morning, a physical therapist came to work with Maddie. Ridge watched, fascinated, as the woman guided her through gentle exercises to rebuild her strength. "You're doing great," the therapist encouraged. "Your dad can help you practice these later today." The word "dad" still gave Ridge a jolt every time he heard it. But now, instead of panic, it filled him with a quiet wonder. That afternoon, Lena returned from a quick trip home with fresh clothes for all of them, and a surprise for Maddie. Her favorite book of fairy tales. Ridge recognized it immediately as the one that had held his photograph. "Will you read to me?" Maddie asked him after dinner, holding out the book. Ridge nodded, settling into the chair beside her bed. As he read about princesses and dragons, he noticed Lena watching them from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. Later, after Maddie had fallen asleep, Lena joined him by the window. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," she said finally. Ridge glanced at her. "For what?" "For being here. For not giving up on her. For—" She hesitated. "For proving me wrong." He understood what she meant. She'd believed his lifestyle made him unfit to be a father. And maybe the old Ridge would have been. But the man standing here now, watching over his sleeping daughter, was someone different. "I should have told you," Lena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the pregnancy. About her. You had a right to know." Ridge nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." He looked at her directly. "But I understand why you didn't." Lena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Can we start over? For her sake?" Ridge thought about the past 10 days. The fear, the hope, the small victories. He thought about Maddie's hand in his, her trust in him, her immediate acceptance. And he thought about Lena, who'd raised this amazing child alone, who'd kept his memory alive even while believing he shouldn't be part of their lives. "Not start over," he said finally. "Build on what we have. Do better." When Lena's hand found his, he didn't pull away. They stood together, watching Maddie sleep, the three of them finally becoming what they should have been all along. A family. 3 weeks had passed since the darkest night in the hospital. The hallways that once felt like a prison to Ridge now seemed almost familiar. He knew which floor tiles squeaked, which vending machine gave extra snacks if you hit it just right, and which nurses would bend the rules about visiting hours. Today was different, though. Today, Maddie was going home. Ridge arrived early, his motorcycle gleaming in the morning sunlight. He'd spent the previous evening cleaning it, making sure it looked its best. Not that Maddie would be riding on it today. The doctors had been crystal clear about that. But he wanted her to see it waiting in the parking lot from her window. A promise of adventures to come. When he walked into her room, Maddie was sitting up in bed, her small suitcase already packed. The stuffed bear, Ryder, was tucked under her arm. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Dad, did you bring it? Is your bike here?" Ridge couldn't help smiling at her excitement. "Right outside your window. Want to see?" He helped her to the window, his large hands steady under her elbows. She was stronger now, but still needed support for longer walks. "There it is." Maddie pressed her nose against the glass, her breath creating a small fog circle. "It's so shiny." "Cleaned it special for today," Ridge said, feeling a strange pride at her approval. Lena entered the room carrying discharge papers and a small pharmacy bag. "The doctor says we're good to go. Just need to finish this paperwork." Ridge nodded, turning back to Maddie. "Why don't we get your stuff together while your mom handles the boring part?" Over the past weeks, they'd settled into a rhythm, he and Lena. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes the old hurt flared up. Sometimes they disagreed about Maddie's care. But they were trying. For Maddie's sake at first, then gradually for their own. Ridge had started taking short rides again 3 days ago, after Maddie had insisted he shouldn't stay cooped up all the time. Those few hours on the open road had cleared his head, reminded him of who he was. But each time, he found himself eager to return, worried he might miss something important in Maddie's recovery. "I made this for your bike," Maddie said now, pulling a folded paper from her nightstand drawer. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures standing beside what looked like a motorcycle. "That's you? And me and Mom?" Ridge carefully tucked the drawing into his leather jacket pocket. "I'll keep it right here," he said, patting his chest. "Close to my heart." Dr. Chen came in for one final checkup, listening to Maddie's lungs and checking her reflexes. "You've made remarkable progress, young lady," he said, smiling. "Just remember to take it easy for a while longer." "Can I ride on my dad's motorcycle soon?" Maddie asked hopefully. The doctor laughed. "Let's revisit that in a few months, shall we? For now, 4 wheels and seatbelts." Ridge caught Lena's eye across the room. She gave him a small smile that said they were on the same page about that particular rule. The nurse brought a wheelchair, hospital policy for all discharged patients, even those who could walk. Maddie settled in, Ryder on her lap, while Ridge wheeled her down the hallway. Staff members they'd come to know stopped to say goodbye and wish her well. Outside, the spring sunshine felt almost too bright after so many days under fluorescent lights. Ridge loaded Maddie's suitcase into Lena's car, while Lena helped their daughter into the back seat. But before getting in, Maddie tugged on Ridge's jacket sleeve, pulling him down to her level. "When I'm all better," she whispered, her eyes serious, "will you take me for a ride on your bike? Just a small one?" Ridge glanced at Lena, who pretended not to hear, giving them this moment. "Yeah, kid," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Maddie's face. "When you're stronger. We've got plenty of time now." Maddie smiled, satisfied with his answer. "Are we going home?"